Today we're going to be making these cool flickering dungeon torches that you saw in my Mushroom Guys video last month. For the diorama wall itself, I used the same techniques that I showed in a previous video, which I've linked down below if you're interested. I punched out some holes where I want the wires for my LED torches to fit through. You can't really see two of these since they're currently just needle holes, but I'll enlarge them later. So I bought this box of flickering tea candles on Amazon for less than $4. And of course now I'll need to make more LED builds in the future because these are just too cool not to use everywhere. Oh no, it's broken. Oh no, I can't read. Anyways, that's fun, isn't it? Having an excuse to destroy something, I bring out my pliers to cut open this plastic cylinder. And I later discover that I can actually just separate these two pieces of plastic without breaking them, but that's okay. This clear plastic flame is cool, but I'll be remaking it in clay later. I confirm the LED still works, and then I remove the battery. Side note, if you don't have any soldering tools and you want to make something with LEDs in it, you can just build a small enclosure that lets you directly connect the battery to the LED, like this, without needing any wires. And I do that same process for the other two LEDs. This is my soldering mat that I got a few years ago as part of my short-lived Game Boy modding hobby. I'm grateful at least that I'm finding a new use for my soldering materials, and hopefully they can be a more regular part of my diorama process, at least whenever I'm using LEDs. For this, I'll be using my solder wire, some flux paste, Kapton tape, and this pretty blue wire. And just out of habit from my Game Boy modding days, I clean the LED wires with some isopropyl alcohol so that I'm soldering onto a clean surface. Then I get my helping hand out to hold the LED while I solder onto it. And I attach my blue wire onto the LED wire and I start soldering, but something feels off. I add some flux to my solder joint, thinking that the issue is that the solder doesn't want to flow easily on this particular joint. But now my joint turned black, which really doesn't seem right. But then after testing the wire connection to the battery, I realized this blue part of the wire isn't the actual wire. I think it's the insulation of the wire. Wow. So I desolder that and I start again with some red and black insulated wires. And then I add some flux to the area that I'm going to solder to help the solder flow better. And that already feels way better than the blue wire I tried to solder. And then I test the connection, and it's good to go. Oh, and if you're going to be soldering anything, make sure you do it in a ventilated area. You probably don't want to be breathing in those fumes. To prevent the two solder joints from touching, I wrap them each in Kapton tape. Kapton tape? I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyways, it's electrical insulation tape that's commonly used as a solder mask or a heat protector for electrical components. And they're ready for their first wall fitting. Here I enlarge the second hole in the wall to fit one of the LED wires through it. And I check to see how it looks and fits, and I start thinking about how large the torch stick needs to be. And here's where my Link Nendroid comes in handy again. He's going to help me determine what a reasonable size would be for the torch, since I usually cater my diorama builds to Nendroid action figures. And then I find the smallest circle cutter that I have that the two LED wires can fit through, and I see if Link can reasonably hold it. And he can, if he just opens his holding hand a little bit more. I roll out a thin sheet of dark brown clay, trim it, and wrap it around the circle cutter. And before baking it, I add some wood grain texture to it with my metal bristle brush? No. With my metal paintbrush? No. Oh right, it's my Clay Pottery Sculpture 7-wire texture brush repair pro needle detail tool. I don't know why I keep forgetting that name. With the base layer of my torch baked, I remove it from the circle cutter, and as you see I left it open on one side to make it easier to move the wires that will go inside of it. Then I trim the bottom of it a bit to start tapering it like a regular torch. and I add a small strip of brown clay to the top of the torch to continue giving it a more cone-like shape rather than its original cylindrical shape. And I smooth that in with my sculpting tool and add some more wood texture to it with my wire texturing brush. The last step for the wooden portion of the torch is adding some more clay to the bottom of it to make it more pointy. I know I sound like an obnoxious health person when I say that these protein bars taste amazing, but these Bearable bars are so freaking delicious. They're the closest thing to a candy bar you'll probably find that has this much protein in it. Food science is seriously the best. Now it's time to sand the torches to make the cone tapering a bit cleaner. And for the flame of the torch, I start by making a clay mold that is roughly shaped like the LED light, so that I can shape the flame right on top of it. But I need to make sure that my clay flame doesn't stick to my clay LED during baking. That's where this stuff comes into play. It's called Clay Separator, and it's basically a liquid that you apply to bake clay when you want to add raw clay on top of it, but you want the two pieces to come apart cleanly after baking. So I apply some of that onto my mold and I let it dry for a few minutes. Okay, before we actually start shaping the flame, what does fire look like again? Oh right, you can't see what I'm seeing. Here you go. That's what fire looks like. After what was definitely not an excuse to play with fire, I get started on shaping my flame. I use my glow-in-the-dark cosclay for this, since I don't have any plain translucent cosclay. And I also tried using some translucent Sculpey clay, but it was too brittle to remove from the mold. This is the kind of thing that would have been a lot funner to make on a miniature pottery wheel, but since I don't have one of those, this will have to do. After baking it in the oven, I trim the bottom of the flame and then carefully remove it from the mold. And then I check to make sure it fits well over the actual LED. This one ended up a little short on one side, but that side can be the back of the torch that no one sees. And since I want the flames to be more orangey, I go ahead and dry brush them orange. Then I take some 1mm thick craft wire and I start poking more holes in the diorama wall where I want the torch holders to be. I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to make the torch holders, so I just rolled out some thin sheets of cosclay and cut them into thinner strips. I baked them and then cut them into a bunch of smaller shapes so that I could experiment with how I wanted the holders to look. I also glued and baked some of the clay strips directly onto the wire so that I could easily bend it into the proper shape without having to worry about gluing anything after baking. Then I used this fun little hole puncher to punch holes in the small clay plates that I'll be using to secure the torch holders to the diorama wall. And this first one's a little off center, but that's fine because you won't really see it. For the final torch holders, I attach some raw clay to my craft wire. And then once I've got that wrapped around the wire as best I can, I attach an already baked strip of clay to one side. That baked strip of clay will serve as the clean, visible portion of the torch holder. After doing that process 5 more times, I bend the torch holders into their final shape and gather the other clay rectangles that I'll be using for the final torch assemblies, as well as some additional clay rectangles in case I need to remake any of them. To prep these pieces for painting, I attach the torch handles to a scrap piece of XPS foam. And I stick the little rectangle pieces to a strip of duct tape to hold them in place while they're being painted. I use a mixture of metallic acrylic paint and black acrylic paint to make the gunmetal-like color for my base coat here. After the gunmetal layer dries, I add a bronze metallic layer on top of that. And the final paint layer on these is a light bronze dry brush to make the metallicness pop a bit more. You can't really tell too much on camera, but I promise it looks more metallic-y. And the last step before assembly is adding a nice satin varnish over these guys. For the wooden torches, I do basically the same paint process. starting with a dark brown acrylic base coat, and then some lighter brown dry brushing, and some even lighter brown dry brushing. Lastly, they're finished with some matte varnish. To attach these little clay rectangles to the diorama wall, I adhere them using some double-sided tape, so that I don't have to worry about dealing with a gluey mess. And then I carefully push the craft wire of the torch holder through the diorama wall, hoping that I don't destroy anything in the process. And I hear the XPS foam squeaking under the pressure. But don't worry, I successfully attached the torches to the wall, and now it's time to figure out what to do with the wires on the backside. This is the first battery pack that I finished hot gluing to the back of the diorama. I used the original battery holder from the T-lamp so that I didn't have to remake it unnecessarily. And I was gonna walk you through the process of how I did this, but after using this diorama wall for several photo shoots, I realized what a huge pain this janky setup was to actually use. So I ordered some battery packs with switches so that I can just use a switch to turn the lights on and off, rather than having to tape the wires to the batteries every time I want to turn them on or off. Also, I did try using the original T-light switch setup, but I couldn't get it to consistently work with the wiring that I have here. So here are the new battery packs after I soldered them to my LED wires. I bought some of these little 3-volt coin cell battery holders with switches, and I just soldered the wires on them to the corresponding wires for the LEDs. I haven't permanently adhered these to the diorama wall yet because I want to continue testing them before I'm convinced they'll actually work long term. And since I don't want to do another photo shoot with just mushrooms, I'm gonna let Link finally be the star of my photo shoot. It's been a while since I've taken any photos of my Nendroids doing action poses, and oh boy, I had forgotten how much time it takes to pose these top-heavy babies and keep them balanced. But the biggest struggle, as you can see here, was trying to get my running mushroom guy balanced. I'm sure there was a better way to accomplish this, but this ended up working well enough after a handful of attempts. And then I add a little tea light, which is off camera for my actual photos, to provide some light on the front of the figures. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.